There are moments in this business, in this world, that feel bigger than the show. Moments that transcend the script. The air gets thin. The noise from 10,000 people becomes a single, sharp hum. You can feel the electricity not just in the air, but on your skin. This was one of those nights. The arena was dark, expectant. For months, there was a void. A silence where a champion's voice should have been. The injury, the whispers, the uncertainty, it all hung heavy in the air. Then the silence shattered. The opening chords of her theme song struck the darkness like a match, and in that instant the entire building didn't just cheer. It erupted. This was the return. The one they said might not happen. The return of their mammy, Rhea Ripley. The building shook. People were screaming, holding their heads, tears in their eyes. This was more than a performance. It was a resurrection. She walked out, the title held aloft, a conquering hero returning to her kingdom. Every step she took was punctuated by a roar from the crowd. She wasn't just a character, she was a symbol of resilience. She stood in the center of that ring, breathing it all in. The adoration, the respect, the sheer, unadulterated joy of thousands of people welcoming her back. She was home. And for a perfect singular moment, everything felt right in the world. But in wrestling, perfect moments are simply the setup for the perfect storm. The noise was deafening, a sea of humanity, all chanting one name. Rhea couldn't hide the smile. This was real. The grueling physical therapy, the lonely nights wondering if the climb back was even possible, the crushing weight of having it all ripped away, it all evaporated in this one moment. This was the payoff. She wasn't just back, she was home. The fans had kept her seat warm. They remembered. In this industry of fleeting moments and short memories, they remembered. She raised the microphone, the metal cool against her lips. The crowd quieted, hanging on a breath. They were ready for the speech, ready for the war cry, ready for the promise of what was next. She was about to thank them. She was about to stake her claim. She was about to tell the world that the nightmare was over. But before she could utter a single word, a different sound cut through the arena. A new theme song, a familiar one. The crowd's roar of joy morphed into a gasp of confusion. The atmosphere snapped, the warmth instantly turning cold. This wasn't part of the celebration. This was something else. A ghost from her past, walking slowly, deliberately, down that ramp. Narration. It was Liv Morgan, the woman who had been her partner, her friend, the woman who had watched, seemingly heartbroken as Rhea was forced to vacate her championship. The confusion in the building was palpable. Why now? Why this moment? Liv slowly entered the ring, her face unreadable. Narration. Rhea lowered the microphone, her smile fading into a look of cautious confusion. Liv just stared. The music stopped. All that was left was the anxious hum of thousands of people holding their breath. What was this? An olive branch? A challenge? Liv walked forward, and a small, almost sad smile crept onto her face. Then she opened her arms. The crowd let out a tentative, "Ah." A reunion, of course. She was here to welcome her friend back. Rhea, still hesitant, accepted the embrace. The two former partners stood in the center of the ring, a picture of reconciliation. The cameras zoomed in on the hug. It was a beautiful, emotional beat in a story of triumph. And then, boom. It wasn't a move, it wasn't a wrestling hold. It was the sickening, sharp crack of Liv's forearm smashing across Rhea's face. The crowd didn't boo, they gasped. A collective, unified shock. Rhea crumbled. Liv didn't follow up with a signature move. She stood over her, her face now a mask of pure, cold rage. She grabbed Rhea by the hair, lifted her head, and screamed something that the microphones couldn't catch. Then she attacked the once-injured shoulder, again, and again, and again. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't for a title. This was a message. This was an execution. Security, referees, agents, they all flooded the ring, pulling a snarling feral Liv Morgan away. The return was over. The celebration had lasted 90 seconds. As Liv was dragged up the ramp, she never broke eye contact with the broken champion in the ring. She wasn't playing a villain. She was something else. The show cut to commercial, leaving a stunned world staring at a black screen. The moment the feed cut to black, the backstage area exploded. It was pure chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets. Writers were throwing their scripts down. What was that? Was that the spot? Who called that? Get her back here now. The plan, the carefully crafted emotional return, it was in ashes. This wasn't the edgy content they had planned. This was different. The violence was too real. The silence from the crowd wasn't good heel heat. It was go-home silence. The kind of silence that means you've broken the trust. You've gone too far. Young agents were frantic trying to get answers. But the veterans, the old-timers, they weren't yelling. One senior producer, a man we'll call Mark, stood by a monitor, arms crossed. He wasn't looking at the frantic chaos around him. He was just watching the replay of Liv's eyes. He saw the producers corner Liv as she came through the curtain, her face still flushed with adrenaline. He saw her walk right past them, ignoring their screams, and lock herself in her dressing room. Mark just shook his head, a look not of anger, but of profound sadness. He'd been in the business for 30 years. He'd seen the lines blur before, but this felt like an ending. He turned to a young writer next to him and muttered, "They actually think the attack was the story. They just don't get it. Ian." He walked away from the noise, pulling his phone from his pocket. He had a number, a break glass in case of emergency number, a journalist he'd trusted for years. He found a quiet stairwell, the concrete damp and cold, and he made the call. "You can't use my name," Mark whispered into the phone. The journalist on the other end didn't even argue. "What happened, Mark? Did she go into business for herself? Was the injury a work?" The questions came fast. Mark let out a long, tired sigh, a 30-year career sigh. "You're all asking the wrong questions," he said, his voice heavy. "You're looking at the puppet, not the strings. You think that attack was the shocking part?" The journalist stopped typing. "What are you saying?" Mark leaned his head against the cold concrete wall. He could hear the faint sound of the show starting back up, the manufactured noise of a crowd trying to forget what they just saw. "You want the real story?" Mark said, his voice cracking. "The reason that girl has that look in her eyes? The reason the company is spinning? It's because the whole thing, the whole narrative, it was all fake." The journalist paused. "Mark, we know it's scripted." "No," Mark snapped, whispering. "Not scripted, fake. The friendship they had, the one that supposedly shattered, that was manufactured by marketing. The devastating injury that took Rhea out, a cover-up. She wasn't injured by a competitor. It was a freak accident in the training room. They lied. They built a narrative of betrayal on a foundation of pure fiction. They've been lying to the fans and to the locker room for months. That was the cover-up. Liv's attack tonight, that was just the truth finally clawing its way to the surface." He hung up. The journalist stared at his screen. This wasn't a wrestling story. This was something else. The story wasn't the attack. The story was the lie. It took less than an hour. The article dropped with a title that would change everything. WWE Insider exposes everything. It was all fake. Cover-up finally revealed. The internet broke. This wasn't the usual wrestling rumor. This wasn't speculation. This was a direct quote from a verified high-level insider. The story wasn't about Liv's attack anymore. It was about the conspiracy. Fans felt a deep, profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't that the show was fake. They knew that. It was that the emotions they were sold were a lie. The story they had invested in, Rhea's tragic injury, Her triumphant return was a marketing strategy. The injury wasn't real. The friendship wasn't real. It was all a work. The term fake echoed across social media, but it meant something different this time. It meant conned. It meant disrespected. The mainstream media, sensing blood in the water, picked it up. Sports blogs, entertainment news, even mainstream broadcast networks, they all ran the story. Deception in the ring. WWE accused of fabricating athlete injuries. The company's stock, a simple line graph, ticked downwards. The narrative was no longer in their control. The firestorm wasn't about a storyline. It was about the very trust between the company and its audience. And in the center of that firestorm were two women who were just supposed to be telling a story. The company, for the first time in a long time, was completely silent. They had no response. The leak had hit an artery and everyone was just watching it bleed. The next day, at the arena, the atmosphere was toxic. The trust was gone. The locker room, usually a boisterous family of traveling performers, was silent. It was divided into bitter, suspicious factions. There were the company people, furious that an insider, one of their own, had broken the code. "You never expose the business," they muttered, glaring at every producer, every agent, every writer. "Whoever the rat is, they're dead." Then there were the younger performers. They felt used. "Wait, so they lied to us too?" one asked another in a hushed whisper. "We all thought Rhea was really hurt. We were all sending her get well texts." The line between the story and the reality had been erased. Who was in on it? Was Liv? Was Rhea? Were the executives? Suddenly, every conversation felt political. Every "how are you?" felt like an interrogation. And what about Mark? The witch hunt was on. He walked through the halls, his stomach in knots, avoiding eye contact. People he'd known for decades now looked at him with suspicion. He wasn't their friend Mark. He was a potential suspect. The very fabric of the backstage world, a world built on a fragile, unspoken code of conduct, had been torn apart. The insider hadn't just exposed a story, he had exposed them. And in doing so, he had alienated himself from the only world he had ever known. The silence of the locker room was louder than any screaming crowd. It was the sound of trust evaporating. The inferno that burned the company also consumed the performers. Liv Morgan, the catalyst, was now the most hated and the most talked about person on the planet. But the hate was different. It wasn't, "I hate this villain." It was, "I hate this person." She was hounded at airports. Cameras were thrust in her face. Was it a lie, Liv? Was it all fake? Did you know? Are you part of the cover-up? She was trapped in an impossible paradox. If she stayed in character and played the villain, she was confirming the media's narrative that she was a heartless part of a corporate lie. If she broke character and told the truth, whatever that was, she would be fired for breaking the illusion and defying the company. She was completely, utterly isolated. The company, in full damage control mode, kept her separate from everyone. She traveled alone. She arrived at the arena and was put in her own dressing room, with security outside the door. She wasn't a performer anymore. She was a pariah. The other wrestlers, unsure if she was a victim or a co-conspirator, just stayed away. She would sit in that cold, empty room, hearing the murmur of the crowd through the cinder-block walls, a crowd that now believed she was the face of fake. The emotional weight of carrying a lie she didn't even invent was crushing her. She had wanted to be the center of attention. She had wanted to make a statement. But she had become a prisoner of someone else's war. Mark drove home in the rain, the radio off. He couldn't stand the sound. Every station was talking about his words. The fake WWE. The insider who. He felt sick. He had wanted to expose the system, the corporate machine that chewed up people and spat out narratives, the executives who saw performers not as humans, but as assets to be manipulated. He wanted to blow the whistle on the lie, but he never, ever intended for the shrapnel to hit Liv. He had watched her for years, watched her work, climb, and fight for every scrap of respect. And in one night, with one anonymous call, he had destroyed her. He had painted a target on her back. He had made her the villain when he knew she was just like him, a cog in the machine. He had become the very thing he hated. He had manipulated a life for the sake of a story. His phone buzzed. It was his wife. He answered, and her voice was small, scared. "Mark," she whispered. "There's a car outside. It's been there for an hour." "Mark, what did you do?" He pulled over, the weight of his actions finally landing. He had exposed a cover-up, but he had started a fire. And now his own family was trapped inside. He had broken the code, and in this business, the code is all you have. The company was hunting for the leak, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, they were getting close. His truth had a price, and the bill was coming due. A week later, the world was demanding answers. The company, bleeding partners and credibility, had only one card left to play. They sent Rhea Ripley to the ring. No music, no pyrotechnics, just a single spotlight. She wasn't in her ring gear. She was in jeans and a t-shirt. The microphone in her hand was shaking. The crowd was silent, a tense, anxious quiet. This wasn't a show. This was a hearing. I read the reports," she started, her voice raw, vulnerable. "I read what the insider said, that my injury was a lie, that my friendship was fake." She looked down at the mat. "You all deserve the truth." Backstage, Liv was watching on a monitor, flanked by executives. "The truth is," Rhea continued, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, "the injury was real. The pain was real. The rehab, the doubt, that was all real." The crowd began to cheer, a small ripple of support. But the insider, he was right about one thing. The building went silent again. "The person I thought was my friend, the person I trusted, that was fake." Her voice turned from sad to cold. "And the attack, that was real." She looked dead into the camera, a close-up on her minimalist eyes. "This isn't a story anymore, Liv. You didn't do this for a storyline. And you," she said, pointing now, "the insider, hiding in the shadows. You exposed nothing. You just gave her an excuse." "I don't know what's real anymore," Rhea finished, "and I don't care. I just know. I'm coming for both of you." She dropped the microphone. The promo was over. But the reality had just begun. The next day, Mark was told to report to the corporate tower. This was it. The end. He walked into the top-floor office expecting security, expecting to be fired. The head executive sat at his desk, not even looking up. "Mark," the executive said, his voice calm. "Sit." Mark sat, his heart pounding. The executive finally swiveled in his chair. He wasn't angry. He was smiling. "The insider story," the executive said, steepling his fingers. "Brilliant. Truly, just brilliant." Mark was stunned. "Sir, I don't know what you mean." The executive chuckled. "Don't be modest, Mark. Your little leak? It was all fake line? Pure poetry." He stood up and walked to the window. "For a month, our engagement was flat. The audience was getting smart. They could see the strings. They were bored. They wanted to believe it was fake, just so they could feel smart. So," he turned, his shadow falling over Mark, "we gave them a leak to find." Mark's blood ran cold. You knew?" "Knew?" The executive beamed. "We planned it. We've been feeding you these little truths for 6 months, Mark. Waiting for you to get frustrated enough to call your journalist friend. We didn't just cover up the injury. We invented the cover-up." Mark stared, speechless. The attack, the leak, the media firestorm, the locker room divide. It was all the real story, the ultimate work. The final fake wasn't the friendship, it was the exposure. The executive had played them all. He'd played Liv, he'd played Rhea, he'd played the media, And he had played his 30-year veteran, Mark, like a fiddle. The best way to control the narrative, the executive said, patting Mark on the shoulder, is to be the whistleblower. Congratulations, Mark. You just created the most talked about, most real storyline in a decade. Now, let's talk about your promotion.